Judge Chavan. He just recently retired. Was it this year?
Last year.
Last year, out of Jefferson County. He was a circuit court judge, and I'll let him quiz you all about that, so be ready. He was a circuit court judge for
18 years.
18 years. He was one of 13 in Jefferson County. He'll tell you a little bit about how he got onto the bench, what he's enjoyed about being a judge. He's not to toot his horn more than I need to. However, I did practice in front of him. I've known him for a long time now. He is one of the most fair judges that I have ever had the pleasure of being in front of. The decisions that he makes, he'll talk about how he makes them. He does not make them lightly at all, and there's a lot of reasoning that goes into them on both sides of the spectrum. So I will give it over to him, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I'm always afraid you're going to trip over that every time. Do you have that same feeling when she crosses over? Are you hoping that she trips over it? Is that what it is? I see your faces. I'm going to talk to you about what I think is interesting, but I may be wrong about that. So if you have something that you'd like to talk about, you should stop me and let's talk about that while we're here in this moment, because there's so much to talk about that if I start to go this way instead of this way, if it's not grabbing you, let me know. Let's start with the idea of a circuit court. And this is the quiz. Okay, last time I got it right, unprompted. Circuit court here is what kind of cases?
Felony.
Yes, well done. And what's a felony? Oh.
You guys know this. What's the punishment for a felony?
If you get convicted of felony, you
Go
can
to prison.
right. And prison is important because that's a state facility, as opposed to a jail, which is a county facility. A misdemeanor, you can go to jail for up to 12 months. And a felony, you can go to prison so long as it's more than 1 year. 1 year. Yeah, anything over 1 year is considered a felony offense in Kentucky. So we have the criminal docket. We also have a civil docket. And I'm perfectly prepared to talk about the civil docket. It's probably less interesting to you all, but you all tell me if you have questions about that. Well, what's a civil? What is a civil case? What's the difference between a civil case and a criminal case? You know, there's going to be a quiz. But what's the difference?
Civil's like dealing with like money and disputes between like companies.
Yeah, it's so true. So you got it exactly right. And people think that's demeaning. Say, well, a civil case is just about money. It is. I mean, it's you did me wrong. I'm going to sue you to make it right. And if I win, you have to give me the money to make up for what you did. You have to make me whole. You have to pay me my damages. So if I'm in a car wreck, you got to pay my medical bills, and you got to pay me for the pain and suffering. You got to get my car fixed. Sometimes it's a little more difficult to put a dollar figure on things, but it is ultimately about money, and that's okay, because the alternative is you try to solve it amongst your, without the trappings of the court. You try to, self-help, and we've agreed that's not a good idea, that you take your problems that you can't resolve on your own to the court, and then the court resolves it. So what's a felony, or what's a criminal case? What's the difference? Is that a lawsuit? No, it's not individual, it's not personal. In a criminal case is the state saying, we are accusing you of committing a crime. And if we are successful, I'm going to say, in quotes, air quotes, at trial, if you're proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of this offense, then it's not about money, it's about punishment. It's consequences, that you could lose your liberty interest. And because the consequences are so much different than in civil cases, there's an there's a separate set of rules that apply to criminal cases that don't apply to civil cases. We call it due process. You have due process rights in a criminal case that you don't. You have constitutional rights in a criminal case that you just don't have in a civil case because of the government involvement. Anybody heard of a grand jury? You know what a grand jury does? All right, this is a new concept. So we're the only place in the world where you have to get permission from the citizenry. You have to get permission from the people. The government has to get permission from the people to prosecute somebody, to put them in prison. And a grand jury is that body. It's a representative group of the people. They're called in for jury duty. In Jefferson County, they serve for 30 days. And they listen to the proof. They will listen to one side of it, basically. And they decide whether they're satisfied that there's enough proof to give the government permission to prosecute this person in circuit court. That's pretty crazy. If you think about that, it blows people's minds who are not from here. It's very American. The idea that you should have a little healthy mistrust of government. A healthy mistrust of government is vital to democracy. An unhealthy mistrust of government is fatal. But that grand jury comes from our founding fathers' fundamental mistrust of government power. So in the federal system, you have to have an indictment that a grand jury made up of people from the community have to give you permission to prosecute somebody. I think it's very cool.
So, just so you all understand, the juries that we normally see, those are called petit juries.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the juries that find people guilty or not guilty, okay? What he's talking about is a grand jury. And this group of people, if they say, we don't think you've made your case, then the case dies completely. It never goes to circuit court. It never goes to federal court, okay? So the ultimate decision on whether the case goes forward or whether the state can prosecute someone falls on the shoulders of 12 individuals before it even gets to court.
Which is amazing. It's a flag-waving moment every time I think about it. You got to clear that hurdle to get to circuit court. So now we're in circuit court, and you've got a criminal docket. There are a lot of people who think you can divide the world into good people and bad people. And if you thought that, then who is on the wrong side of the Commonwealth versus who? Is that the good people or the bad people? If you think that there are good people and bad people, that's only two types of people in the world. Who do you think that is on the wrong side of that be? Who do you think those people think? Yeah. And do you think that's true? Do you think that everybody on the wrong side of the Commonwealth versus them is a bad person? No, they're not. There are a lot of people who think that, though. There are a lot of people who think that you deserve to be where you are. Good people should get rewarded, bad people should get punished, and you must be a bad person because it's Commonwealth versus you. Because you were accused of a crime or because you committed a crime, even. So what I tell people is this. The people who end up on the wrong side of the beat, people end up in trouble in circuit court. There are some bad people, don't get me wrong. But the vast majority of them are undereducated, underemployed, under the influence of drugs and alcohol. That's the big one. Underserved in terms of their mental health needs. And this is a little more harsh, a little more subjective, but I call it underraised. That they did not have people in their lives at a formative time of their lives to guide them in a way that would keep them out of trouble. And probably everybody knows somebody like that. It's just, you can always work backwards from how they got here. You can always see, it's not hard to figure out how a person got there. It's usually some combination of all those things. Which is good news, because if a person is a bad person, you can't snap your fingers and make them to a good person. But if a person is undereducated, what can you do?
Educate.
Yes, and if a person is under the influence, what can you do?
Rehab.
Yes, and if a person is underemployed, what can you do?
Help them get a job.
Help them get a job. And if they are underserved with respect to their mental health needs, what can you do?
Counselors.
Get them services, exactly. And if they're underraised, if they haven't had guidance in their lives to that point, what can you do?
Guidance counselor.
Yeah, you can help them. There's a great there's a couple of different programs. There's one in prison. It's called Stinkin' Thinking, which is it's a cognitive behavior modification class, and because people you have to learn how to make good decisions. It's not automatic. And sometimes if you've been surrounded by people who make nothing but bad decisions and who aren't interested in helping you how to make good decisions, teaching you how to make good decisions, then you learn to make decisions wrong. You don't think about consequences. You don't think about the long term. You don't think about other people. You think about the immediate, right here and now. And if you can learn something, you can unlearn it and you can relearn it. And so people go through their stinking thinking. There's another one called the Day Reporting Center has another version of it. And I've had people go through, they go, oh my God, that was so me. That's exactly what I was doing. And now that I know not to do that, I'm gonna do better. So the point of all that is, I think sometimes people, when they meet a judge, they think, well, here's an example. So I used to do this thing where if kids would come into court, and you know, there's a little time, I'd say, hey, you know, I'm a little tired, why don't you be the judge? Come on up. And so I'd give them my robe and I'd sit them in the chair and I'd give them the gavel. And guess what they did? If I handed them the gavel, what's the first thing they did? Yes, they made the meanest face imaginable and started pounding that gavel. It's like, Jesus, how is that the image of judges? Actually, adults do it too. It's the thing. You're in contempt. It's like, how did that get to be the image of judges? That they're there to just yell at people and punish people. Judge Judy. You know, if you've never met a real judge, you've never been in a real courtroom, then your perception of what judges do is based on what you've read or seen on TV. And most of the judges on TV are jerks. Like they're there for entertainment. They're there to, it's like their purpose is to belittle that person and make them feel small and stupid for the entertainment of everybody who's watching. So I guess that's where that comes from, because in real life it's very different. It's an adversarial system, which means you have different sides. The judge is neutral. The judge doesn't have a side. But it's much more collaborative than you would think. Just because we're on opposite sides doesn't necessarily mean that we're working against each other. We may have things in common. And when somebody comes into the courtroom who is undereducated, underemployed, under the influence, all those things, then it's in our collective best interest to try and help that person not be those things. We may have a different path to get there, but there's common interest. And not just because we're nice people, because we are. Even if it wasn't the right thing to do, it's still the smart thing to do, because if you can help that person not get themselves in that situation, they don't come back. It's a benefit to everybody to have somebody be there one time and never again. If you don't help them while you've got them there, if you don't deal with the problems that got them there, then they'll be back, because those problems don't go away because somebody goes away. Sending somebody to prison doesn't fix those problems. The reason I mention that is punishment is very popular because it's very clean. You did something wrong, and now you're being punished for it, and everybody can kind of understand that. And there's a sense of safety and comfort we get from the idea that these bad people are going away, and that they can't do bad things to us. And there's also a little bit of psychology that says, I'll never be in trouble because I'm not a bad person. So it's complicated, but it's kind of understandable from a human perspective, that feeling. I used to make this analogy. I said, I started out as a judge, and then all of a sudden I found myself being an addiction counselor, because 95% of the people in front of me have a profound substance abuse problem. There aren't any burglars. There are people who are addicted to drugs who break into your house to get drugs or get money to get drugs. They're not like cat burglars with a little mask and the sack, like they in the cool hat. They're not professional burglars. They're people who are addicted to drugs. And we used to say, forever we'd say drug addict. Why do you think it might be a good idea to stop calling somebody a drug addict who has substance use disorder? What's that feel like? If I say you're a drug addict, what does that feel like?
It's demeaning.
It is. And I have to say, I'm 60, almost 61 years old, so I've used that for most of my life. It's only the last 10 years that I learned not to use it. But if I call you a drug addict, it's like saying you're a jerk. You have a character flaw. There's something wrong with you, and it's you that there's something wrong with. You should be ashamed of yourself. And there's a lot of shame that goes with drug addiction. Because people who are addicted to drugs feel that way about themselves, because they don't see themselves, they don't see it as being what it is. And what it is, and I'm convinced of this, there are still people who want to debate this, it's not worth fighting about, because it's demonstrably true, that substance use disorder is an illness. It's a, you can call it a mental illness, whatever you want to call it, but it is a treatable illness. That if I said, hey, you've got cancer, you wouldn't think you were a jerk. You wouldn't think that it was a character flaw that gave you cancer. You'd think, oh my God, what do I do about that? Where do I go to get help for that? What I need to do? Sign me up, because if I don't get help, I'm gonna die. So little things like that have changed over the time that I've been on the bench, the time I've been involved in the criminal justice system, where there's a much more holistic approach. It's not weakness, it's not permissiveness, it's understanding that the people who appear before the court are people. They're people. And not only deserving of that attention and deserving of that time and respect, it ultimately inures to everyone's benefit to spend that time with them making that happen. So, so I said I went from being a judge to the addiction counselor to ultimately, I just called it basically a life coach. Somebody comes in like, dude, what you're doing is not working. And I know it's not working because I'm talking to you, and if it was working, we wouldn't know each other. So what is it that you need help with? How can we help you help yourself so that we never have this conversation again, so that you can move on to something more and better and different? And that is perceived in some circles as liberal or woke or I don't know, weak. To me, it's just smart. It doesn't matter what your politics are. There's no doubt about the reality of that situation. I can't say to a person who's been, here's a 21-year-old person, I can't say to that person, you know how you are? I'm ordering you to stop. I need you to be completely different. And if you are completely different, then I'm going to put you in prison. What's the success rate on that? Yeah. Seriously, everybody be different tomorrow. When you come back tomorrow, be completely different. Or we're going to fail you. Everybody fails tomorrow, because you can't turn on a dime. People can change, but it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes intervention. And it's worth the effort, because when they do change, some people would say they went from being a bad person to a good person. But what they went from is being an unproductive person to a productive person, to somebody who can function. But that's not what the people who make the mean face and bang the gavel think judges do. They think judges enjoy, that they live to punish, that they live to put people away. Raise your hand if you've ever sent somebody to prison. Oh, I have. Am I the only one? Okay, it's just me. All right, so I'll tell you, it sucks. There's no pleasure in that. Even if that person is a bad person, even if they're terrible, there's so much trauma around it that the satisfaction of punishing that person for causing all that trauma does not relieve that trauma. It doesn't relieve that harm. It doesn't clean anything up. At most, it prevents maybe that harm from happening again, or at least for some period of time. And it has some healing effect sometimes on the people who are harmed. But it's not a win. It's not a, hey, everything's okay now. It's just the sad ending to a sad story most times. Judges make a lot of decisions. And one of the most important decisions they make is, do I send this person, in a criminal case is, should I send this person to prison, or should I give this person a chance not to go to prison, which we call probation? The Commonwealth attorney, the prosecutor, makes a recommendation in every case. And the prosecutor can say, here's the deal, it's 5 years, and the defendant agrees to serve that time. The judge can still probate that person, they're not bound by that deal. Or they could say, it's a 5-year sentence, we're going to recommend probation. And that's important, because if the Commonwealth recommends probation, the court still doesn't have to probate that person, but if they don't probate that person gets to take their deal back. They get to start over. You can't sandbag them like that. You can't, you have to say, okay, I'm not gonna follow the recommendation. You wanna take your plea back, or you wanna go to prison for 5 years? Take the plea back would be good, thanks. So that's another one. They can, Commonwealth can say, we recommend, it's a 5-year sentence. We are taking no stand on probation, which is, Judge, we're staying out of this, you do what you think's best. They can say, we're objecting to probation, we're gonna argue for it, and then you do what you think's best. Or they can say, we're gonna have no objection, which means we're okay with probation, but you do what you're gonna do. Which is ultimately the judge's job. So when you get down to it, the judge is deciding, should this person be probated or not probated. And decision-making is not a result, it's a process. So if I probate somebody and they go out and cure cancer, that's great. Oh man, that's a great decision. Maybe, it was definitely a great result, but was it a great decision? Depends. How'd you make that decision? I'm gonna flip a coin. Heads, you go to prison. Tails, I'm gonna probate you. No matter how that turns out, that's a terrible decision. It's a terrible decision, because it's a terrible way to make a decision. So what judges are taught to do, and are trained themselves to do in some respect, what they have to do, is make a decision based on their assessment of the available facts and the law. It's facts and law. So let's assume the person that's appearing in front of the judge is convicted of doing something just horrible. I mean, horrible. Like, the classic is, okay, they've molested a child, they've murdered a child, and that just gives you this horrible feeling in your stomach. You know who has that horrible feeling in their stomach when they sentence that person? Everybody, including the judge. The difference is, the judge doesn't do what they do because of that horrible feeling. They have to do what they do despite that, or without regard to that. And we call that, word we use is dispassionately. The judge must act dispassionately. It doesn't mean you don't feel that. It doesn't mean you're not revolted by it. It doesn't mean you're not angry with somebody for what they did. You can be seething with anger, but what you can't do is sentence somebody to prison because you're seething with anger. You sentence that person because, in looking at the factors that you have to consider, based on the facts and the law, that you believe it is the appropriate thing to do for those reasons, regardless of what you feel. So the legislature, for better or worse, they make the laws, and they say they create a law. I call it categorically. Here's the category of things you can't do. So you can't, for example, if you're a convicted felon, you can't own a firearm. You can't possess a firearm. So that's the law, and it applies to everybody. We're all bound by it. We're all protected by it. And let's say there's 1,000 people in the box of people who now have been charged with possession of a handgun by a convicted felon. Who thinks that all those people are exactly the same? Who thinks they're all different? Yeah, they're all different. And so there's a range of penalties and there's a range of options that are available to the prosecutor and to the judge. And their independent responsibility is to do what justice requires, to make sure that similarly situated people are treated similarly and that they're treated fairly. So in that box, we reach in that box, we pull out somebody who was convicted of a theft 20 years ago, when they were a kid, 18 years old. Now they're 38. Is that right? 48. 48 now. And they have a food truck that they serve people late at night, so they keep a gun under the counter to protect themselves. All right, that's one person. You reach in there again. Here's a person who has been convicted of assault, murder, and robbery, all while armed with a weapon. They each had the same kind of gun. The guy had it in his food truck. The one guy had a food truck, and the other guy had it in his pocket. Should they get the same sentence? Why not? They both did the same thing. Why don't they get the same thing?
It's murder and as an assault charge.
Different circumstance, right? It's a totally different, because they're totally different people, and it's a totally different circumstance. The only thing they have in common is that charge. And that's not enough to say that you're exactly alike. You're not anything alike. So what the judge's job is to make that assessment and to figure out what should happen to this person who committed this offense under these circumstances. Not to figure it out, that's a deal that's made between the prosecutor and the defense attorney, and the defendant. But when it comes to sentencing, it's like what's the right thing to do for under these circumstances with respect to this individual. And so you can have people who are charged with the same thing that have wildly different dispositions. And from the outside looking in, they're like, that's crazy, that's not fair. Man, that guy got convicted of reckless homicide and he didn't go to prison. And that guy got convicted of reckless homicide and he got 5 years and had to serve every day of it. That's not right. Well, if that's all you know about it, it doesn't feel right. But the deeper you dig, the more likely you are to find is, okay, that's why. That's why. They're different people under different circumstances. But if you don't have that context, then it's very easy to fill in your own answer. And the answer is, oh, it's politics, or oh, it's money. This guy had a paid lawyer, this guy had a PD. That's the difference. No. This guy had political connections. This guy, the prosecutor and the defense attorney and the judge are friends. You know, all kinds of things that human nature dictates you're suspicious of that are almost never, ever, ever the reason. So the point of telling you that is, when I would sentence somebody, I always made it a point to explain why I was doing it. You didn't have to believe me. You can go ahead and think it was because I was taking money from the other side, or because I don't like you, or because whatever. I don't like the color of your skin, or because I'm a jerk. That's a good one. Maybe I actually think of something, but yes, calling myself a jerk reminded me of something I'll tell you about. But the point is, if I at least say it out loud, I can't probate you, and here's why. At least I've told them that, and I took it pretty seriously, and it would kind of drive lawyers crazy because I would be talking to the defendant a little longer than most people would. But my test was, when I was finished, when I got finished, if the person's leaving to go to prison, more often than not, they stop and say, "Thanks, Judge. You're welcome." You know, but you know, to me that was a test, because you realized that what I was doing made sense even if you didn't like it. Why do you think that might be important for somebody to not feel like they've been screwed over when they go to the penitentiary? What difference might it make? Any difference?
They understand why they're there and like what they can do to be better while they're in there.
Yeah, exactly. If you're in prison because of something I did, then you don't need to change. If you're in prison because of something you did, then you have control over that. You can't change me, but you can change you. You can fix this. You have the power. You don't give me the power. So it was important to me that people understood that I'm not mad at you. You're not going to prison because I'm mad at you, because I don't like you, because I'm frustrated with you. You're going to prison for these. I can't probate you for these reasons. But you're going to get out, and when you get out, you have a chance not to go back if you use this time to figure out what you need to figure out to work on yourself. It sounds a little kumbaya-y, but it really is a difference maker. And I know that from having spoken to people over the years who've gotten out and who've told me that they did think about that they did understand, oh my gosh, this is me. I'm in my own way. It's not people say, well, I caught a charge. You didn't catch a charge. You did the thing that resulted in your being charged. You didn't fall out of the sky and drop on your head. You made a series of bad decisions. So how can you make better decisions? Let's figure that out. And it comes back to the education, employment, all the things that guidance, all sobriety, all those things that give you the clarity you need to make good decisions. One of the things, I have this conversation all the time with people. They'll say, you know, what is up with these kids today? Because a lot of juvenile crime. There's a lot of I'd say in circuit court, you're talking about kids between 15, young as 15, and probably 25, 26. That's the sweet spot of crime. That's the majority of the people fall in that category, and they're mostly male, for the most part. Women are making quite a comeback. So, why do you think that is? What are your thoughts? Boys are just different. Girls are smarter. Is it cultural? Is it physiological? Is it mental? Is it I don't have an answer, but it is a thing. I know I was that age once, and I know I did a lot of dumb stuff. I used to say the only thing dumber than 19-year-old boys is a group of 19-year-old boys. Yeah, it's probably true. Yeah, yes. The thing that those guys have in common, and this is sad to me, is a lack of perspective on the future. There used to be a thing when it's kind of a standard job interview question: where do you see yourself in 5 years? And for most of those kids, that would be like saying, how would you like to live on Mars? There's no concept of future. There's no idea that, oh, I need to do this now because later it will inure to my benefit. If you don't see a future for yourself, you make very different decisions about what you're going to do in the present. If you didn't think you were going to live for another month, you come into school today? Probably not. If you didn't think you were going to live for another month, would you be preparing for what's going to happen next year? Would you be preparing? Would you be worrying about what college you're going to get into? You would be living today like it was your last. So for a lot of people, for a generation or two of people who are the chum of the criminal court system, those are people who cannot envision themselves having a future that's worth fighting for. It's just a condemnation, not of them personally, it's of all of us. It's a societal problem. There was one of the worst cases I ever had. I'd seen a lot of bad stuff, and this was one of the last cases I sat on. This 15-year-old boy goes to murder this guy because they were beefing on Facebook. They're yelling at each other, threatening each other. He uses a 15-year-old girl to entice this guy into revealing where he is, sets him up. When the guy comes out to meet the 15-year-old girl, he shoots him, chases him in the house, shoots him, and then shoots his 3-year-old daughter in the back of her head, kills her. Worst thing I've ever seen. And, I talk about being dispassionate. The judges, I feel this stuff, but I'm not be motivated about it. I'm able to say that. Everybody in the court was crying, including myself. Just seeing the video of this was too much for everybody. So I'm talking to the jury afterwards. They convict the guy. They sentence him to life sentence. It's a 15-year-old kid for the rest of his life in prison. Who had zero remorse. He was probably fronting a little bit, but he really didn't seem to care. Which is shocking, frightening, all that stuff, but just sad mostly. So here's what the jury said. They said they're exposed to this world that he lived in, which to them was like being on Mars. It was a totally different world than what they were used to, the majority of them, where stuff like this was an option to him, where it made sense to him to do what he did. If it didn't make sense to him to do it, he probably wouldn't. To him, that seemed like the thing to do. And in the world, the little tiny world he was living in, yeah. And so what they said was, it is, I'm paraphrasing, they said, we were shocked, amazed, and saddened by this kid's life. We thought, what kind of world is it that produces a kid like this? And then went one step further. We said, and then we thought, what's our responsibility for allowing that world to exist or even creating that world? what shared responsibility we have for that. Which I thought was one of the most thoughtful, insightful comments that they're all crying too. It was horrible. They felt bad for this kid who did this terrible thing because they could see in that world that terrible thing was just a thing. So it's not all sad. There's lots of opportunities for people who have strayed from the path, who didn't know how to get on the path, people who were too drunk to see the path or too high to see the path. There's all kinds of opportunities for folks to get in the system, get what they need, and to get on with their lives. That's most people. It's not what you read about, it's not what you hear about. The sensational stuff is what's going to stick. But there's lots of people who go into that system. The adversaries work together to find a solution to this particular issue that involves helping this person deal with those problems, and they move on to something more and better and different. That's very rewarding. It's good to see that. It makes you, otherwise it honestly just kind of breaks your spirit. So after 18 years of that, I was 39 when I got on the bench. I was almost 40. I just turned 59 when I got off the bench. So you see a lot during that time, and while it didn't change my opinions about anything, it didn't make me any more or less hopeful. It does wear on you. You do remember things and people who you tend to remember the things that went wrong as opposed to the things that went really, really right, which I think is natural. Thoughts so far? Comments so far? Questions so far?
Does anybody have a question that you all would like to ask based upon what you've heard so far? If not, I'll kind of
fire them away.
ask my, one of the questions that has been asked previously is what has been one of the hardest cases. You kind of shared one of the saddest cases that you had on the bench. What's one of the hardest cases that you have had to either preside over or as a prosecutor that you had to prosecute? I don't know if we've went into his background. Judge Chavan was a state prosecutor, which is what I was, and also a federal prosecutor prior to becoming a judge.
Yeah. So the hardest cases are the cases that do not end in where you don't feel like you've accomplished something at the end of it. So it's not that the person was found not guilty. There's a case where the person was found not guilty, and that was kind of what I expected, and they probably should have been not guilty. It didn't mean. Let me back up. Here's an interesting thing. Let's talk about that. Who thinks that there are any not guilty people in prison? Okay, and I got to tell you, you're wrong, because everybody in prison either pled guilty or is found guilty. Now, who thinks there might be innocent people in prison? Yeah, there's a difference. So, guilty is a legal conclusion that is drawn by those 12 people based on the evidence that is presented to them that day. It doesn't change the reality of what happened, and it's not necessarily right. Most of the time it is. It's like they're but it is possible for somebody to be found guilty who did not commit the crime they're charged with. Absolutely. It's an imperfect system because it's run by people. It's a pretty amazing system because it's run by people, but it is not without fault. So the most difficult cases are the ones that stick with me, I guess, or the hardest cases are where I was left unsatisfied with the result, and I felt like it was maybe something I could have done that would have changed it. That I took it personally. Which it's not ideal to do that, but you can't help it. That what could I have done that would have made this different, this outcome different? Can't think of one off the top of my head, but there are lots of things like that. The difficult part of I don't know if I told you the story from last class. Did I tell the story about the probation revocation? So this isn't necessarily difficult, but it's important. So when I was a young prosecutor, I was doing what's called a probation revocation. So everybody knows what probation is, right? So probation is the judge says, you're not going to prison today, but I'm going to give you these rules. You got to follow these rules, and so long as you follow these rules, you will not go to prison. But if you don't follow these rules, then there are gonna be consequences. I could put you in jail, I could do some other things, but ultimately, you could go in prison if you don't follow these rules. So there's a motion to revoke this person's probation, to send them to prison. It's one of the things you do when you're a young prosecutor or young lawyer. It's great because you get time on your feet when you're talking to the judge, or you're doing a direct examination, you're doing a cross-examination, you're lawyering. So, so I'm doing this thing, and the guy gets revoked, and the older, wiser prosecutor was with me, said, "Hey, you did a great job. You're prepared, it's well organized, you asked me questions on direct, your cross-examination was really good, and you made a very nice argument to the judge that made good sense. But here's the thing, when that person leaves this courtroom and they go through that door that leads to the jail, they don't disappear. They go to a terrible place that will change their lives and the lives of everyone who knows them for the rest of their lives." Wow. So what he was telling me was, this is not a debate. This is real. These people are real. And you don't win or lose when you're a prosecutor. You don't declare victory. They used to say on Wild World Sports, there was the agony of the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And here, sometimes you have the agony of victory. That it sucks to win because that person goes away, but as I said before, it doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't fix anything. It's just the sad ending to the sad story. So the most difficult cases are ones where I felt like I didn't do enough or do it well enough to impact the change. The case I use, I teach trial practice at the law school, and the case I use is a case from, let's see, which is the previous century, 1992. 21-year-old kid and his buddy are messing around with a gun. He puts a bullet in it, he spins it, and points at his friend and says, "Do you feel lucky?" His friend says yes. He pulls the trigger, it goes click, and the girls scream, because boys like to make girls scream. It's what boys do since God have been boys and girls. They make them scream. Stop it, stop it. So what does he do? When the girls say, stop it, what does he do?
Keeps going.
Of course he does. Yes. So he spins it again. "You feel lucky?" And the guy could see where the bullet was in the revolver. And so they kind of had a communication. "Yeah, I feel lucky." What he's really saying, "Hey, is it safe?" And pulls the trigger again. Guess how that ends? About an hour later. Yes, exactly. Ends up his buddy's dead. So I'm prosecuting this guy. And I tried very hard to settle the case. A plea negotiation is where we agree that in exchange for your plea of guilty to this charge, I'm going to recommend this sentence. And I was anxious to plead that case. It's another sad case. Not a bad kid, just did a dumb thing. Guys do dumb things at that age. They do dumb things that put themselves and other people at risk. And if you survive it, the next day when you tell that story, it's just funny. "Man, last night I was driving the car on the highway with my feet. It was hilarious." And at the time it wouldn't be hilarious if you go off the road and kill yourself. But in that moment, you just don't see it because of the lack of maturity. I don't mean that disrespectfully. The part of your brain that says, "Hey, stupid, don't do that, it's dangerous," is not fully developed until you're 29. So you just don't see things the same way. It wasn't any different. When I was 19 years old, some friends and I jumped on a moving train. Well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that today. There's no way. But at the time, it made perfect sense. So the kid, he wouldn't plead guilty. He goes to trial, and the jury convicts him of murder. 20 years. He gets 20 years for that. And I was very unsatisfied with that. I think my penance is that I used that case in this trial practice class because I was just so uneasy with that result. It was sort of his own making, and he was technically guilty of murder, but if I said, write down 100 ways that somebody can murder somebody, you're going to go a long way down that list before you get to something like this. But it technically is murder, and murder is technical. It's not what you think it is or what I think it is. It's what the legislature says it is. And if it's proven, for ease of digestion, every offense is broken down into elements. So if murder is elements A, B, and C, we'll say. And if I prove, the Commonwealth proves A, B, and C beyond a reasonable doubt, and you're the jury, what do you have to do? What do you got to do?
Say that they're guilty.
Yeah. even if you don't want to, even if you don't like it, even if you wish you didn't have to, you still have to. What if they just prove A and B, and not C? What do you have to do?
Say that there's reasonable doubt.
And so you said the Commonwealth has to prove A, B, and C in order for this person to plead guilty, to be guilty. You've only proven A and B. What do you have to do as the juror? Not guilty. What if you don't want to? What if that feels bad? Do you still have to find him not guilty? Yes, yes. And can you ever say, you know what, you didn't prove the case, but I'm gonna go ahead and find him guilty because? No. And can you ever say, you know what, you did prove the case, but I'm gonna find him not guilty because? No. The jurors are amazing. The jurors are an integral part of this process, and they're amazing in that they desperately want to do the right thing, and they're desperately afraid of doing the wrong thing, and they take that job just as seriously as you'd hope they would. So in this case, you know, they don't want to find this guy guilty. Hell, I don't want to find this guy guilty. But he is guilty of murder because it was those three things. And he rolled the dice at trial and it came up wrong. He was not a good decision maker. And oftentimes the people who are sitting at the defendant's table, the defendants in the pumpkin suits, they are by definition terrible decision makers. And the decision to go to trial is just the most recent terrible decision they've made. So one of the things you're a good prosecutor and a good defense lawyer and a good judge, they're not conspiring to do this, but part of their responsibility is to make sure that person sitting there understands what his options are and has a clear view of which one is the better option. We used to do a thing where if you had a decision challenge defendant making a bad decision, turning down a deal that he absolutely should take, and you should only take the deal, here's why you should plead guilty. Because it's better than going to trial, period. This is better, taking this deal is better than what's gonna happen at trial. And if you can see that clearly, then you make that decision. But even then it's hard because hope springs eternal and maybe something will happen at trial, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you just can't see it clearly because you're undereducated, underemployed, under the influence, blah, 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 and suffering from mental health issues and all those things. So sometimes you get a defendant in that position and there would be sort of an unspoken understanding that what they wanted me to do was give them the "I'm not telling you what to do" speech. What do you think I'm telling somebody when I tell them I'm not telling you what to do? I'm totally telling you what to do. Yeah. So the "I'm not telling you what to do" speech goes like this: "Partner, I'm not telling you what to do. You make the decision, and we're all going to live with the consequences. Nobody more so than you, because none of us are going to prison. But the Commonwealth has made this offer. They're offering 5 years. If you're convicted at trial, the lowest sentence you could get was 20 years. And just because there's such a huge difference between those numbers, my responsibility is to say it out loud so the record reflects that you understand what you're doing. Because if this goes as wrong as it possibly could, and everybody's telling you that it will, you can't complain about it. You can't say, hey, nobody ever told me that. And most of the time, it's like, okay, give me a minute, let me talk to somebody. And I wasn't trying to force them into doing something, I was trying to help them make a good decision. So, long way of saying there's trying to control the outcome can be frustrating for people who have control issues like I do. And when it doesn't turn out right, when that kid goes to prison for 20 years for something he could have gone home for, it's not satisfying to me. Those are the hardest cases.
Anybody have any other questions? Okay, I'll ask this question. What has been, I asked this before, but what has been your favorite job that you have had as far as being a state prosecutor, federal prosecutor, and a judge? And what is the most rewarding aspect of that?
Okay. So I'm spoiled rotten. So I've had 4 jobs since I got law school, and I loved every one of them. If you love your job, man, are you living the dream? Most people hate their jobs or just suffer through their jobs. If you find a job you love, hang on to that. So I've had 4 jobs, loved every one of them, for different reasons. The judge job to me was the best job. And I don't know if I said this in the previous class, but it's worth repeating, is the greatest thing about the judge job is, and really the hardest thing at the same time, is that when you're making really important decisions that have that impact on people's lives, you're not doing it back in your office. You're not doing it at home. You're not doing it remotely. The person whose life is being affected by your decision is sitting there looking at you. It is incredibly personal, incredibly intensely personal relationship. So you can't avoid you can't pass the buck on that because there's a face associated. Actually, there's faces because you also got a lot of times you have a gallery full of people who are interested that go with that case. It's not on paper. It's not one dimensional. It's three dimensional. It's real life. So it's the best public service job I've ever had because of that. But also, it's the hardest.
And I think it's important, we discussed this before, but it's important to understand that not only do you have the defendant, you have the prosecution, you have the defense. We're arguing for two different sides, usually polar opposite, but you also have the defendant's family and the victim's family. Judge, thank you so much for being
Thanks,
here.
guys.